The rhythmic chatter of computer keyboards filled the operations center, their clacking keys blending with the hum of air conditioning and the occasional beep of system alerts. Lieutenant Sofia Novak sat slightly apart from it all, her posture straight and her gaze focused on the communication panel that most others ignored. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform, though slightly worn at the elbows, was impeccably maintained. There was something about the way she held herself, confident yet isolated, that seemed to create an invisible barrier between her and the rest of the room. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sofia carefully noted a sequence of transmission patterns in her notebook, a weathered journal with color-coded tabs extending from its edges. The notebook contained entries spanning years, documenting patterns in communication anomalies, frequency shifts, and dialect variations that nobody else bothered to track. Nobody asked to review it. Nobody cared. Yet she brought it to every briefing, every mission planning session, every moment that mattered. The communication station she operated sat at the edge of the room, its screens displaying scroll-in data that appeared unremarkable to untrained eyes. Unlike the satellite imagery analysts who drew crowds when displaying high-resolution reconnaissance photos, her work attracted no attention. Its value lay in the patterns between the words, the pauses that revealed more than the transmissions themselves. Sofia had identified 3 security breaches that week, flagging suspicious communication protocols and dialect inconsistencies that helped the team avoid potential traps. She had not received a single acknowledgement. That wasn't unusual. Near the command platform, a group of intelligence officers leaned against the wall, coffee cups in hand, shoulders relaxed in casual conversation. One of them glanced toward Sofia and smirked. "Novak is still hunting for enemy spies in routine transmissions," he said, loud enough for her to hear. Then she analyzed another weather report as a secret code. There were several chuckles. One mimicked her accent, exaggerating the slight Eastern European inflection that colored her English despite years of practice. Another pretended to listen intently to an imaginary earpiece, then dramatically widened his eyes in mock alarm. None of them looked directly at her. They didn't have to. The mockery was familiar, practiced, a daily ritual that had lost its sting but never its presence. Sofia said nothing. She checked the last monitoring sequence, confirmed the transmission log, then moved toward the database console to input her final analysis. The screen flickered in the harsh fluorescent light. She shielded it with her hand, typed without hesitation, and uploaded her daily communication pattern analysis. Her report included a notation about an irregular dialect pattern she had detected in the northeastern sector, just outside their surveillance perimeter. It was subtle, probably nothing. Still, she recorded it. Inside the analysis room, the walls displayed footage from drone cameras and satellite feeds. Intelligence officers gathered in clusters, discussing terrain features and pointing at highlighted regions on digital maps, their voices competing for space in the crowded room. Sofia stepped past them toward the data terminal, her notebook balanced carefully in her hand. The mission briefing played on the overhead screen, showing convoy routes and checkpoint locations. Her communication anomalies had no place in the presentation. That wasn't unusual either. A senior intelligence officer from the visiting team looked over as she passed. He didn't lower his voice when he spoke to his colleague. "There she is, Novak, flagging regional dialect variations as security threats again." His companion added with a thin smile. "At least she's thorough about categorizing all her false positives." The group laughed. The sound was casual, unforced, familiar, that somehow made it worse than direct hostility would have been. Sofia entered her access code, scanned the latest transmission logs, and set the terminal to correlation mode. She moved with precision, Each step part of a sequence she had perfected through repetition. She never rushed. She never lingered. She didn't ask for space at the console. She created it by not acknowledging the comments floating around her. The notebook pages turned quietly under the cooling fan's gentle breeze. She caught a loose page and held it steady until the data transfer completed. Once the upload finished, she closed the notebook, tucked it under her arm, and turned away from the terminal. The laughter continued behind her as she walked toward the corridor. Her expression remained unchanged. She had learned long ago that reacting only encouraged them to try harder. Back through the outer corridor, the bass noise faded to a distant murmur. The concrete walls were cooler here, and fewer people occupied the auxiliary spaces. Sofia moved past the security checkpoint and into the analysis room where the detailed work happened. This was the space that briefing videos never captured. It smelled of coffee and electronics, with a faint undertone of cleaning products. She sat at her designated station near the back wall and placed her notebook in front of her, opening it to the last entry where the dialect anomaly had been marked in blue ink and underlined twice. The official system hadn't flagged the transmission. No automated alert had triggered. To anyone else, it was background noise in an already cluttered communication environment. But Sofia had detected something in that brief exchange. A pattern that carried a signature she couldn't dismiss. The dialect was wrong for the region. The speech patterns didn't match known local variations. Someone had classified it earlier as regional slang, probably farmers from the border area. No one had asked her to verify. No one had forbidden her from doing so either. The base's announcement system chimed softly overhead, and a muffled voice echoed through the corridors. Visiting officers were assembling for the strategy session. Field teams were preparing for deployment. The communication station, with its screens dimmed and systems running automated scans, had already been shifted to standby mode. Sofia closed her notebook, her fingers tracing the worn edge of the cover for a moment. Then she stood, straightened her uniform, and walked toward the exit without speaking to anyone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The dismissal stung less than it once had, but it still left marks. She had been the invisible analyst for so long that sometimes even she questioned whether the patterns she identified were real. But the notes in her journal didn't lie. The inconsistency she tracked held significance even when others refused to see it. Tomorrow would bring another shift, another chance to prove that careful attention to detail mattered. She just needed to keep listening, keep documenting, and hope that when it truly counted, someone would finally hear what she had been saying all along. The communication center held the kind of stillness that only came after hours of continuous operation. Monitoring systems hummed quietly inside their metal casings, cycling through automated checks while displays cast subtle blue light across the empty workstations. Outside, the main operations floor buzzed with activity as the day shift prepared for handover. But inside this room, everything remained hushed and controlled. Screens displayed incoming transmission data across the monitoring panel, bathing the compact space in a soft electronic glow. Sofia sat alone at her station, headset resting around her neck, her notebook open beside the keyboard. Her boots were still damp from the morning rain that had swept across the base, and her uniform jacket hung on the back of her chair. She had stayed behind while others left for the shift briefing, drawn back to the communications array by something that wouldn't release its hold on her thoughts. The dialect anomaly from earlier continued to trouble her. It sat in her mind like a splinter, small but persistent. She initiated a secondary language analysis protocol, watching the diagnostic window sort through recorded transmissions. The system compared speech patterns against regional dialect databases, identifying variations in pronunciation, vocabulary choices, and grammatical structures. Most analysts allowed this process to run unattended, trusting the automated system to flag significant deviations. Sofia didn't. Her eyes tracked every comparison, every assessment on the screen. During the third analysis pass, something flickered in the northeastern sector feed. It wasn't a strong indicator, just a brief deviation in speech rhythm that didn't align with the regional pattern. One parameter shifting for less than 30 seconds before blending back into the expected baseline. She paused the analysis sequence, rewound the audio, and listened again. The difference was subtle, barely detectable above the background static, but it carried a specific characteristic that made her lean closer to the screen. The speaker used grammatical constructions that suggested formal military training rather than the regional colloquialisms of local residents. The stress patterns were controlled and deliberate, not the natural cadence of native speech. Sofia adjusted the filtering parameters and initiated another scan using different baseline comparisons. The anomaly disappeared completely under standard analysis settings, as if it had never existed. She sat motionless for several seconds, listening to the air conditioning cycle on and off, then made a decision that would change everything. She flagged the anomaly in her personal notes and entered a detailed observation. Possible military speech patterns detected in civilian transmission. Unidentified source northeast of monitoring zone. She tagged it with precise timestamps and weather conditions, then saved the entry to her personal database rather than the official system. It wasn't enough evidence to escalate through formal channels, but it was definitely something worth investigating further. Sofia opened the communication line to her shift supervisor, Major Reynolds, who was one room away, preparing the daily intelligence summary for the command team. His voice came through layered with the sounds of papers shuffling and conversations. In the background, when she explained what she had detected, his response was immediate and dismissive. Regional variation, he said without hesitation. Probably someone who moved from the eastern provinces or spent time working in the capital. Happens all the time in border areas. Sofia clarified that the speech pattern didn't match any regional dialect in their database, including eastern provincial variations. Reynolds pushed back harder, his patience clearly wearing thin. Look, Novak, the transmission was probably just someone with unusual education or who learned the language later in life. The sector has been quiet for weeks. The communication network is in monitoring mode, not active threat assessment. When she requested permission for a targeted analysis using specialized linguistic comparison tools, Reynolds paused longer before responding. The delay told her everything she needed to know. Negative on additional resources tonight. Note it in your personal log if you want, but that's the end of it. We're not diverting system resources to chase dialect ghosts, Sofia didn't argue. She had learned that pushing too hard only made supervisors more determined to shut down her inquiries. She acknowledged the order and closed the communication channel, but her certainty had only grown stronger. The dismissal had been too quick, too automatic. Reynolds hadn't even asked to hear the audio sample or review the pattern analysis. He had simply rejected the investigation based on assumptions. She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out her regional dialect map. The chart unfolded across her workspace, covered with her own notations of speech patterns and linguistic boundaries accumulated over months of careful listening. Near the northeastern edge, a highlighted zone marked an area where 3 distinct dialect regions overlapped, creating a natural linguistic mixing zone she had documented during her first week at the base. Sofia placed her finger at the edge of the overlapping dialect region and traced the most likely communication routes through the area. The anomaly she had detected originated precisely in the narrow corridor where no single dialect should dominate. The perfect place to hide unusual speech patterns among the natural variation. Not obviously suspicious, but distinct to a trained ear. The mathematics of linguistic probability supported her theory. The frequency of certain speech constructions was statistically improbable for any of the regional variations. Her intuition, honed by years of careful observation, told her the pattern was deliberate. Not dramatic, not conclusively proven, but quietly, persistently present. She drew a small circle around the transmission origin point, then traced a line connecting previous transmissions she had flagged over the past month. The pattern formed a loose perimeter around a sector that intelligence had recently classified as low priority. The monitoring system chimed softly behind her, indicating that the automated scan cycle had completed. Scheduled maintenance would begin in minutes. Sofia refolded her dialect map, slipped it between the pages of her notebook, and rose from her station. Her footsteps were nearly silent as she walked the length of the room without looking back. In the hallway, voices echoed from the break room where off-duty personnel had gathered around someone's tablet, displaying sports highlights. Laughter filtered through the partially open door, a sound that seemed to belong to a different world. Entirely. She moved past without pausing, used her access card to enter the secondary analysis lab, and waited for the backup system to initialize. There, she reopened the transmission record and pulled up the saved audio file. Instead of dismissing it as ordered, she reclassified the entry under a new designation: Linguistic Anomaly, Technical Review Recommended. The new label would bury the file deep in the system architecture, but wouldn't delete the data. Anyone conducting a thorough system-wide search would still find it if they knew what parameters to use. Sofia attached her identifier to the modified entry and saved it to the secure database. No one would notice the reclassification tonight, but the information would remain accessible. She had learned to work within the system's constraints rather than fight against them. Sometimes the most important discoveries were those that waited quietly in overlooked folders, preserved by someone who understood that today's dismissed anomaly might become tomorrow's critical evidence. She remained in the dim light of the auxiliary lab for several more minutes, her attention fixed on the screen where the audio waveform pulsed gently before fading back into the system's visual display. The pattern was still there, still real, still waiting for someone to recognize its significance. Sofia logged out of the system and secured the terminal. She had done what she could within the constraints of protocol. Now she could only hope that her careful documentation would prove valuable when the moment came to act. The analysis center had settled into the measured rhythm of night operations. Most displays showed automated monitoring processes, their screens displaying continuous data streams that washed the darkened room in pale digital light. Overhead, the shift indicator had changed from day to evening status, signaling reduced staffing and automated priority filtering. Sofia stood near the main monitoring station, her notebook held close, its familiar presence a comfort amid the electronic environment. The screen in front of her displayed a single transmission record with no special designation, no priority flag, just a timestamp and coordinate marker. She had entered the data 2 hours earlier and found herself returning to it repeatedly. The ambient noise in the room had diminished as officers moved to the briefing stations across the hall. Their conversations drifted through the open doorway, already transforming routine observations into actionable intelligence. Monitoring. Technicians reclined in their chairs, monitoring automated systems while half listening to status updates from field teams. The large overview screen displayed camera feeds from various checkpoints, convoy movements, and drone surveillance patterns. The communication analysis never appeared in these operational displays. Sofia refreshed the language analysis and reviewed. Her flagged transmission again. The speech pattern remained consistent with her earlier assessment. The anomaly had lasted approximately 20 seconds. But its structure displayed the controlled precision of military communication protocols rather than civilian conversation. Not aggressive, not overtly suspicious, just unnaturally precise. In a way that suggested professional training. The data didn't demand immediate action. It whispered rather than shouted, which made it easier for others to overlook. She loaded her annotated dialect map onto her tablet and overlaid it with the recent transmission data. The map was her own creation, meticulously developed through months of careful listening and pattern documentation. When the overlay resolved on screen, the flagged transmission appeared positioned precisely along the edge of a known patrol route that had been classified as inactive 3 weeks earlier. She traced the potential movement pattern with her stylus, calculating how this position related to previously documented anomalies. The correlation was subtle but undeniable. Major Reynolds approached from the doorway, his footsteps deliberate. On the polished floor, he was trim, efficient, and perpetually focused on measurable results rather than theoretical concerns. He frowned when he noticed her display and gestured at the screen with obvious frustration. "You're still analyzing that dialect anomaly, Novak." Sofia kept her voice even and professional. "The speech pattern matches military communication protocols. The position aligns with 3 previous transmissions I've documented from the supposedly inactive sector." She indicated where the transmission origin corresponded with her projected pattern. "The timing and linguistic characteristics are consistent with coordinated field operations." Reynolds tilted his head, his expression shifting from frustration to something closer to condescension. "It's background chatter from local security forces. The system already filtered those transmissions last month when they ran training exercises in the area. The automated classification tagged and cleared everything relevant." He tapped the edge of the desk with his pen. "The sector is quiet. Novak, no additional analysis on ambient communications. Tag it as resolved and move on to active priorities. Let the system handle what it's designed to handle." Sofia asked if any verification procedures had been implemented for transmissions that fell outside automated classification parameters. Reynolds gave a short laugh that carried no humor. "You think we're going to waste analyst hours in system resources on every unusual turn of phrase that shows up in routine communications? The computers are better at this than humans. They don't create patterns that aren't there." The implication hung between them like a wall. Sofia had been labeled as someone who found threats in routine noise, who chased linguistic ghosts, who couldn't separate significant anomalies from normal variation. The reputation had followed her through multiple assignments, a whispered assessment that colored how others evaluated her observations. She nodded without expression, waiting for Reynolds to continue his rounds. As he walked away, Sofia turned back to her station. Her hand moved toward the resolution command, then stopped. Instead of closing the file, she reclassified it under an administrative designation, linguistic baseline, historical reference. The new classification would preserve the data indefinitely while keeping it outside the active monitoring queue. Anyone conducting systematic database searches would eventually discover it, along with her detailed analysis and supporting documentation. The screen dimmed as the power-saving mode activated, and her dialect overlay faded from view. Sofia saved her analysis parameters, then closed her notebook and secured it in her desk drawer. The familiar weight of its knowledge provided a small measure of reassurance. Whatever happened next, she had created a permanent record of her observations. The truth, as she understood it, would persist even if no one currently believed it. Outside in the corridor, footsteps echoed against the tile floor as the night shift personnel moved between stations. Officers passed without acknowledging her, their attention focused on immediate tasking rather than theoretical concerns. Near the end of the hallway, a media liaison was packing equipment after recording footage for the weekly intelligence briefing. Someone posed for a final photograph beside the command center entrance, but the communications section wasn't included in the frame. Sofia stepped through the doorway into the quieter corridor beyond, walking steadily toward her quarters. She had maintained her composure throughout the interaction with Reynolds. She had not disobeyed direct orders or violated established protocols. But she had also not allowed the transmission record to disappear entirely. The data would remain in the system, waiting for someone with sufficient authority and interest to investigate further. Sofia had learned to work with patience rather than confrontation, to preserve possibilities rather than force immediate action. The weight of doubt pressed against her certainty as she walked through the base's dimly lit passages. Maybe Reynolds was right. Maybe she was identifying patterns in random communications, chasing ghosts that existed only in her imagination. The thought had haunted her through previous assignments, making her question every analysis, every instinct, every professional judgment. But the documentation in her notebook didn't lie. The speech patterns, positional analysis, and transmission. Timing all pointed towards something deliberate operating beyond their surveillance perimeter. Sofia reached her quarters and prepared for what she suspected would be a restless night. Tomorrow would bring new transmissions, new data, and new opportunities to prove that meticulous attention to detail served a purpose. She had preserved fragments of evidence throughout the communication databases, creating a foundation that might prove meaningful when circumstances changed. Sometimes the most important discoveries emerge not from dramatic confrontations, but from the patient accumulation of small inconsistencies that eventually became impossible to ignore. The pattern was still active, still transmitting, still waiting for someone to recognize its significance. Sofia had done everything possible within the constraints of operational protocol. Now she could only hope that her careful documentation would matter when the moment arrived for decisive action. The monitoring center stretched under harsh fluorescent lights, nearly empty except for a skeleton crew managing overnight operations. Most workstations sat vacant, their screens displaying idle system diagnostics or automated scan patterns. The central command platform remained staffed with a minimal team, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of monitoring displays as they maintained essential operations. The typical daytime bustle had faded to the quiet efficiency of night. Shift protocols. Sofia crossed the main floor deliberately, her access badge clipped to her uniform and her tablet tucked under her arm. The room temperature had dropped slightly with the reduced personnel, and the constant keyboard clicking had given way to the soft hum of cooling fans and occasional system alerts. The northeastern sector display showed normal activity patterns, its threat assessment indicators all registering standard baseline readings. Nothing appeared unusual to casual observation. The communication monitoring station waited in the corner, scheduled for routine maintenance calibration during the quiet hours. No operational priorities, no special tasking, just standard system checks under minimal supervision. Sofia's name wasn't on the maintenance roster, but her system access remained active from her earlier shift. The oversight created a procedural opportunity that she could utilize without violating direct orders. No one questioned her presence when she entered the monitoring section. Military operations functioned on the assumption that personnel belonged wherever they appeared with appropriate credentials, especially during night shifts when supervision decreased. Inside the monitoring station, indicator lights cast muted patterns across the specialized equipment. The night technician in the corner cubicle worked through calibration procedures with methodical precision, occasionally making notations on a digital clipboard. Another analyst dozed in his chair while automated systems ran their diagnostic cycles. The atmosphere was relaxed, informal, the kind of routine maintenance period that happened regularly without attracting attention. Sofia took her position at an unoccupied terminal without announcement. She gave a professional nod to the technician, activated her workstation, and began the system initialization sequence. Her movements were efficient and practiced, each action flowing naturally into the next. No one questioned why she was there. No one challenged her authority or credentials. In intelligence operations, competence often substituted for formal authorization, and Sofia had earned recognition for her technical skills even among those who dismissed her analytical conclusions. The monitoring systems activated one by one. As power flowed through the communication array, signal acquisition, frequency analysis, linguistic processing modules all initialized in sequence. She adjusted her headset, entered her access credentials, and waited for the systems to stabilize. The technician glanced over once and asked if she needed to access the Northeastern Sector databases for her calibration testing. Affirmative. She replied, her voice professional and confident. Northeastern Quadrant should provide good baseline patterns for the recalibration. The technician nodded and continued his work, unaware that Sofia had her own objectives for the access. The monitoring systems came fully online, their displays showing active communication channels throughout the operational area. Sofia watched as data streams populated her screen, displaying the background communications that flowed continuously through the region. The system initially showed nothing unusual, all channels operating within expected parameters for nighttime activity. As the system settled into stable operation, Sofia implemented her plan. She initiated a specialized linguistic analysis protocol, bypassing the standard filtering algorithms that had previously dismissed her concerns. The system accepted her commands without triggering any security alerts, recognizing her credentials and expertise level. Her customized dialect map loaded from her personal storage drive, displaying the speech pattern analysis she had developed over months of careful documentation. Within 17 minutes of continuous monitoring, the anomaly reappeared. It was more distinct than before, a clear pattern of communication that stood out against the background chatter. The speech characteristics had shifted slightly but maintained the core elements she had previously identified: military precision, controlled vocabulary, and artificial regional markers designed to blend with local dialects. Sofia adjusted the filtering parameters and focused the system on the transmission origin. The monitoring array responded by isolating the signal, providing clearer audio quality and more precise locational data. She requested a minor system adjustment from the technician, explaining that she needed to verify calibration across multiple frequency bands. The technician, focused on his own maintenance checklist, approved the adjustment without question. As the system reconfigured to the new parameters, Sofia's target transmissions became even more distinct. The unusual speech pattern held steady, displaying the characteristic signatures of encoded communication rather than casual conversation. She activated the Advanced Linguistic Analysis module and directed it toward the isolated transmissions, adjusting for regional variations and background noise. The pattern that emerged on her secondary screen confirmed her suspicions. What appeared as dialect variations to casual listeners contained structured elements that followed military communication protocols, shortened syntax, precise timing, intervals, and subtle emphasis patterns that conveyed additional meaning. The transmissions originated from a sector that intelligence had designated as inactive, a remote area where monitoring had been reduced to basic, automated scanning after weeks without significant activity. Sofia's training took over, pushing aside personal vindication to focus on professional analysis. She tagged the transmission pattern with the designation variant echo and began documenting everything she could detect. The technician asked what she had found, and she kept her response professionally neutral. Unusual regional dialect variation, possibly indicating population movement from Eastern territories. Implementing standard documentation protocols. She routed her findings through a technical review channel, avoiding the main intelligence network to prevent immediate scrutiny from those who had dismissed her earlier concerns. The message was straightforward and technical: linguistic anomaly requiring specialized analysis, possible security implications. The response came 14 minutes later, acknowledging receipt but authorizing no immediate action. Standard procedure for technical alerts during off-peak hours. For Sofia, the confirmation was sufficient. She had identified what everyone else had missed as background noise. A coordinated communication pattern was operating beyond their perimeter. Using sophisticated linguistic disguise techniques that had defeated automated detection systems, the pattern had remained invisible to the sophisticated algorithms that everyone trusted, visible only to a human analyst who understood the subtle variations that technology couldn't yet recognize. Sofia continued monitoring the transmissions for another 47 minutes, documenting speech patterns, transmission intervals, and positional data, building a comprehensive case for security intervention. The technician made a casual remark about the night shift being more interesting than usual, but didn't inquire about details. Military professionalism often meant focusing on your own responsibilities without questioning what others were doing. As the maintenance period concluded, Sofia transferred her documentation to secure storage and deactivated her workstation. The transmission pattern remained preserved in the system memory, a documented anomaly that had proven its existence through multiple verification methods. She had identified it, analyzed its characteristics, and initiated the reporting process that would eventually trigger appropriate response. When the system lights switched to standby mode and the maintenance cycle completed, she left her station with quiet satisfaction. Outside, the night shift continued their routine operations, adjusting equipment settings and preparing for the morning handover. No one acknowledged Sofia as she crossed the operations floor. No one asked what she had discovered during her analysis. She walked through the monitoring center with her tablet secured against her side, carrying the knowledge that potential security threats now depended on her ability to make others recognize what she had identified. The pattern was no longer theoretical. It was a security concern waiting to be addressed, if she could convince the right people to listen. The pre-dawn hours at the intelligence base maintained a different quality of quiet, broken only by the persistent hum of electronic systems and the occasional footsteps of essential personnel. Sofia sat at her assigned workstation in the nearly empty analysis center, one earphone positioned carefully while she kept the other ear uncovered to detect any approaching supervisors. The displays surrounding her showed minimal activity, presenting weather data and automated system reports that required no human intervention. She had returned to her station after the night's discoveries with a sense of purpose that she carefully contained beneath her professional demeanor. The communication pattern was real, documented, and continuing to operate despite being in a supposedly inactive sector. Military protocol required proper verification, appropriate channels, and sufficient evidence before resources would be allocated to investigate. Sofia had learned to navigate these requirements, building her case methodically rather than demanding immediate response. The communication analysis display showed her documented findings with clinical detail. Military speech patterns disguised as regional dialect variations. Transmission locations corresponding to supposedly inactive areas. Communication timing that suggested coordinated field operations. The transmission analysis she had refined during the night shift showed a clear pattern of activity that moved systematically through areas officially designated as low priority. Time was becoming increasingly important, but she needed more than her personal analysis to trigger official response. Sofia initiated a comprehensive database search for any security incidents that might correlate with her identified pattern. The system processed through field reports, security alerts, and anomaly notifications from the past 2 weeks. Most queries returned negative results, but one entry captured her attention. A brief notation about an unauthorized vehicle crossing that had been reported near a remote checkpoint. The incident had been classified as a navigation error by local civilians who had strayed from the designated travel corridor. The reporting officer had documented the event, but designated it as resolved with no follow-up required. Standard. Procedure classified such incidents as routine unless multiple violations occurred in the same location. Sofia compared the vehicle crossing location with her communication pattern coordinates, accounting for terrain features and established travel routes. The alignment was too precise to be coincidental. She opened a secure communication channel to the regional security coordinator, routing her call through the intelligence network. The duty officer responded promptly, but with the measured tone of someone managing routine inquiries during an otherwise quiet shift. Sofia identified herself and requested priority assessment of a potential security concern. I have documented evidence of disguised military communication patterns in the northeastern quadrant, approximately 12 kilometers from Outpost 7, she reported, maintaining a calm, professional tone. Pattern characteristics are consistent with coordinated field operations, and position correlates with an unreported vehicle incursion from 3 days ago. The security coordinator requested her evidence parameters and verification methodology. Sofia provided the precise transmission data, linguistic analysis, and correlation evidence that supported her assessment. She emphasized that the pattern had been verified through multiple analytical systems and that the communications appeared to be using increasingly sophisticated methods to avoid detection. There was a pause on the communication line followed by the sound of computer keys. The coordinator was accessing the security incident database, cross-referencing her information with existing reports. When he returned to the conversation, his tone had shifted to one of increased attention. We show a vehicle incident in that general vicinity, classified as resolved. Are you confident about your communication pattern analysis? Sofia confirmed her assessment, providing additional details about the linguistic markers and transmission characteristics she had documented. The security coordinator acknowledged her report and initiated preliminary alert protocols, but cautioned that field team deployment would require command authorization. The earliest possible security sweep would be after the morning briefing, assuming her evidence was deemed sufficient to justify resource allocation. After closing the communication channel, Sofia returned to her monitoring duties with mixed emotions. She had successfully escalated the situation through proper channels, but operational response remained dependent on convincing those who had previously dismissed her concerns. The communication pattern she was tracking would continue operating for several more hours without intervention. She maintained continuous monitoring of the target sector, updating her analysis every 20 minutes and documenting any changes in transmission patterns. The communications remained active, occasionally shifting frequencies, but maintaining the distinctive linguistic characteristics she had identified. As the first hints of dawn appeared outside, Sofia received confirmation that her report had been forwarded to the morning command briefing for review. The field security team was being placed on standby status, but deployment still required final authorization from command staff, the same officers who had repeatedly dismissed her previous concerns. She provided updated transmission data and linguistic analysis to the security coordinator, emphasizing that the pattern showed signs of increasing activity as daylight approached. The morning briefing was scheduled to begin as shift change completed, with field teams assembled for potential deployment based on the day's priorities. Sofia documented the latest transmission pattern and transferred her complete analysis to the briefing package. She had done everything possible within protocol to alert the command structure to the security concern. 37 minutes before briefing time, the pattern changed dramatically. What had been careful, disguised communication suddenly intensified, with multiple transmissions occurring simultaneously across the sector. The linguistic disguise elements dropped away, revealing clear military communication protocols operating in what was supposed to be an inactive area. Sofia immediately notified the security coordinator, transmitting the new communication pattern in real time. The coordinator's response carried a new urgency as he confirmed that the command Briefing was being moved forward and field teams placed on immediate readiness status. The sudden change in communication patterns had accomplished what her careful documentation alone had not, creating undeniable evidence that required immediate response. Sofia listened to the accelerating preparations with quiet satisfaction, knowing that her persistence had established the foundation for recognizing the threat when it finally revealed itself. The communication pattern that others had dismissed as regional dialect variations had become a clear security alert that no one could ignore. Her careful documentation and professional methodology had convinced the right people to prepare for action when it mattered most. The transmission pattern that others had dismissed as background noise had been real, deliberate, and indicative of precisely the kind of security threat she had suspected. As field teams prepared for deployment, Sofia remained at her monitoring station, updating her documentation with the latest transmission data. The entry was precise and detailed, recording the evolution of a pattern that had begun as a subtle anomaly in routine communications. No one had specifically acknowledged that her initial identification had been correct. No one had recognized that her persistence had established the baseline for recognizing the threat when it intensified. The military system operated as designed, with each person performing their designated function in the command structure. Sofia had done her job. The security teams would do theirs, and the potential threat would be addressed through appropriate channels. The professional focus that kept the operation functioning efficiently also kept individual contributions from being celebrated. But Sofia knew what she had accomplished. She had demonstrated that human analysis could detect what automated systems missed. She had shown that persistence and professional expertise could overcome institutional skepticism and procedural obstacles. Most importantly, she had proven that the meticulous attention to detail that defined her approach to intelligence work served a critical purpose that extended beyond personal recognition. The pattern that had started as a whisper in background noise had become an active security alert. Sofia had been the essential link between initial detection and operational response, between data patterns and potential threat. As she prepared her final documentation before the field teams deployed, she carried the quiet certainty that sometimes the most significant contributions happened without fanfare, recognized only by those who understood the true value of noticing what others overlooked. The operations center had transformed completely from its night shift quiet. The typical beginning of shift conversations had disappeared, replaced by focused activity that seemed to compress the air in the room. Officers moved with purpose between stations, their attention fixed on deployment screens that showed team positions and communication channels. The large display walls presented real-time footage from surveillance drones hastily deployed to the northeastern sector, scanning the supposedly inactive area where Sofia's communication pattern had originated. Sofia entered the room quietly, her tablet displaying the latest transmission analysis, her posture straight but unassuming. Her uniform showed slight wrinkles from the extended shift, and loose strands of hair had escaped her careful bun after hours of wearing a headset. She looked like someone who had been working continuously on something important, though she carried herself with the same professional restraint that had always characterized her presence. She didn't seek attention or wait for acknowledgement. She simply crossed the operations floor with measured steps, moving between workstations and command consoles without unnecessary conversation. Her presence wasn't dramatic, but it carried an undeniable weight in the room's charged atmosphere. Conversations paused briefly as she passed. Screens remained displaying the same tactical information, but eyes followed her movement. At the key primary command station, Colonel Harlow stood reviewing deployment options with the security team. His expression remained controlled, but there was tension in his shoulders that suggested he was processing unexpected developments. When he spoke, his voice carried the focused precision that came with years of command experience. "Who authorized Lieutenant Novak's communication pattern analysis?" The question hung in the air for a moment, but not as an accusation. The operations manager, Captain Reeves, responded without hesitation. She didn't request special authorization. Sir, she identified a potential security anomaly and documented it within existing protocols. He paused, then added with subtle emphasis, no one specifically prevented her from continuing her analysis. The colonel nodded once, his attention returning to the deployment display. At that moment, the main entrance opened and Sofia completed her approach to the command platform. She moved through the center of the room, past the clustered intelligence officers who were coordinating with the field teams preparing for deployment. Two senior analysts at the primary console shifted slightly as she approached, not dramatically, but enough to acknowledge her presence and create space for her to access the system. The main tactical display showed the real-time deployment status, its data updating continuously. The most recent command entry was clearly visible. Field team deployment authorized. Initial alert source, Lieutenant Novak, Communication Intelligence. No elaborate explanation, no detailed justification, but the attribution was unmistakable. Everyone in the operations center could see it, and everyone understood its significance. Sofia stopped beside the tactical display and opened her analysis file to the documentation she had compiled over the previous week. She placed her tablet on the edge of the command console, revealing the linguistic pattern analysis she had meticulously developed. The screen showed transmission characteristics, speech pattern documentation, and position calculations that precisely matched the coordinates now designated as the primary security concern on the tactical display. Lieutenant Wei, one of the tactical analysts, glanced at Sofia's documentation, then back at the main deployment screen. The correlation was undeniable and compelling. "That was your pattern," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of realization and professional respect. "You tracked this from the beginning." Sofia gave a single nod, neither boastful nor apologetic, simply confirming what the evidence already demonstrated. Wei stepped back from the console, her gaze shifting between Sofia's meticulous documentation and the sophisticated tactical systems that surrounded them. The contrast was striking. Advanced technology had failed to identify what human expertise had detected and documented. On the tactical display, drone footage showed movement in the supposedly inactive sector. The security team's deployment pattern was adjusting in real time, responding to the threat that Sofia's analysis had first identified. A voice from the communications section spoke what many were thinking. "We wouldn't have known to look there without her pattern identification." No one contradicted the statement. The timeline was too clear, the correlation too precise. The few automated security systems had classified the communications as routine background chatter. The official protocols had dismissed the linguistic anomalies as regional variations. Only Sofia's persistent attention to patterns others couldn't recognize had preserved the evidence long enough for the threat to become undeniable. The media team, who had been preparing standard footage of routine security operations, stood beside their equipment without recording. The typical b-roll of checkpoint procedures and patrol routes seemed irrelevant compared to the active security operation developing in real time. An operation based not on standard procedures, but on the careful analysis that had detected what automated systems missed. Sofia remained at the command console for another moment, closing her analysis file with the same methodical precision she brought to all her work. Then she secured her tablet and stood ready for further instructions. She didn't offer explanations or seek recognition. She had done what professional responsibility required, identified a potential threat, documented the evidence, and ensured that the information reached those who could take appropriate action. As she turned from the tactical display, Colonel Harlow shifted slightly to face her. He didn't speak immediately, but his expression carried the weight of professional acknowledgement earned through demonstrated expertise. The gesture was subtle, almost imperceptible, but in the military context, it represented significant recognition from a commanding officer. "Lieutenant Novak," Harlow said, his voice carrying clearly through the operations center. "I want you on communications monitoring during this operation. Your familiarity with the pattern will be valuable as we assess the situation." The assignment was both a professional acknowledgement and a practical decision, placing the analyst, who had identified the threat in position to provide continued expertise. Outside the operations center, the base had shifted to elevated security status. Personnel moved with increased urgency, and additional security measures had been implemented at all access points. Another officer paused when he saw Sofia, straightening, his posture in a way that suggested her status had visibly changed. She said nothing, continuing toward her assigned station with the same focused determination that had characterized her entire approach to the situation. Back inside the operations center, the tactical display updated with new information from the field teams. Movement confirmed in the northeastern sector. Unauthorized personnel identified. Security response initiated. This time, no one questioned the validity of the alert. The images provided undeniable confirmation of what Sofia's analysis had identified days earlier. The deployment proceeded with unusual intensity. Officers coordinated their actions without the typical casual conversations that often accompanied routine operations. The atmosphere had been transformed by the recognition that a significant security threat had been operating undetected along their perimeter, visible only through the careful analysis that had initially been dismissed as unnecessary attention to detail. Sofia's name would appear in official reports, performance evaluations, and operational assessments that extended far beyond the immediate security response. But the most meaningful recognition had already occurred in the focused attention that followed her entry into the operations center, in the space that others created for her at the command console, and in the understanding that expertise and persistence had identified what technology and standard procedures had missed. The meticulous attention to detail that had once made her an outsider had become the foundation for professional respect that no one could dismiss. The colonel's voice came through the command channel, addressing the operations team as field. Units approached their deployment positions. All units maintain communication discipline. Lieutenant Novak will monitor all transmissions for pattern recognition. The instruction was brief but significant, placing her expertise at the center of the operation rather than at its margins. The transformation was complete, but Sofia's approach remained unchanged. She had always understood the importance of her work, even when others hadn't recognized its value. The field operation unfolded with the controlled precision that defined military responses. Tactical teams moved through the northeastern sector in coordinated patterns, their positions tracking across the command center displays in real time. Drone footage showed the terrain from above, rolling hills, interspersed with patches of dense forest and the occasional cluster of abandoned structures that had once been farm outbuildings. Sofia sat at the communication monitoring station, headset positioned precisely, her attention focused completely on the incoming transmissions from both the field teams and the surrounding area. Her station had been reconfigured to her specifications, the monitoring parameters adjusted to highlight the linguistic patterns she had identified. No one had questioned these modifications. The same officers who had dismissed her concerns days earlier now deferred to her expertise without hesitation. Colonel Harlow stood at the central command platform, his posture balanced between contained energy and disciplined control. His voice came through the communication system with measured authority as he addressed the deployment teams. All units maintain tight formation protocols. We have confirmed unauthorized activity in grid section 7. Approach with standard security measures and prepare for potential hostile contact. The response from team leaders came back in crisp acknowledgement, their professionalism evident in every word. Sofia listened to the exchanges with half her attention. The rest focused on monitoring background transmissions from the target area. The pattern she had been tracking for days had changed again, becoming more sporadic and shifting to different frequency ranges, suggesting that whoever was operating in the sector had detected the approaching security forces. She adjusted her monitoring parameters, tracking the evolving communication strategy with the same meticulous attention that had identified it initially. The linguistic markers remained consistent even as the technical aspects shifted, the underlying patterns still visible to her trained ear despite attempts to obscure them. "Sir," she said, addressing Colonel Harlow directly for the first time, "target communications are adapting to our presence. They're implementing frequency shifts consistent with evasion protocols." She transmitted the updated pattern to the tactical display, highlighting the changes she had detected. Harlow studied the new data for 3 seconds, then made his decision. "Accelerate approach timeline. They know we're coming." The field teams acknowledged the new instructions and increased their pace, moving more aggressively toward the target coordinates that Sofia had identified. On the monitoring displays, thermal signatures appeared in a cluster of seemingly abandoned structures, heat patterns that indicated human presence where official records showed only uninhabited terrain. The security teams adjusted their approach. Vectors converging on the location from multiple directions to prevent potential escape routes. Sofia continued tracking the communications, noting each adaptation and countering it with adjusted monitoring parameters. The pattern was evolving rapidly now, but she stayed with it, recognizing each change almost before it completed. Her fingers moved across her console with practiced efficiency, each adjustment flowing naturally from her understanding of the underlying methodology. "They're implementing a communications blackout," she reported, noting the sudden cessation of all transmissions from the target area. Standard procedure before either evacuation or defensive positioning. The colonel nodded once, already issuing updated instructions to the field teams. "All units prepare for potential resistance. Surveillance drones maintain perimeter coverage to identify any attempt to exit the area." The operation had transformed from routine security sweep to active interdiction, all based on Sofia's initial identification of communication patterns that automated systems had dismissed as background noise. As the field teams closed in on the target structures, Sofia detected a brief transmission, just 3 seconds of communication that broke the self-imposed blackout. Most monitoring systems would have missed it entirely, but her specialized parameters captured it immediately. "Transmission detected, east perimeter," she reported, forwarding the location data to the tactical display. "Single burst, likely emergency communication." The field commander redirected 2 teams toward the new coordinates, their movement appearing as shifting tactical markers on the command display. The operation culminated 23 minutes later with the identification and containment of 7 unauthorized personnel operating sophisticated communications equipment inside what appeared to be abandoned farm structures. The equipment was military-grade, designed for long-range secure transmissions, and configured to mimic regional communication patterns to avoid detection. Initial field reports classified the group as advance reconnaissance for a larger operation, gathering intelligence and establishing communication routes before the main element moved into position. Their capture had disrupted what intelligence would later confirm was the early stage of a significant border incursion. Throughout the operation, Sofia maintained her professional focus, tracking communication patterns and providing real-time analysis without seeking acknowledgement or celebration. The successful resolution unfolded through standard military procedures, with each person performing their assigned role in the operation. But everyone in the command center understood the critical role her initial identification had played. As the field team secured the site and began processing the captured personnel, Colonel Harlow approached Sofia's monitoring station. He stood beside her console for a moment, reviewing the communication pattern analysis she had compiled over the past week. "Your initial assessment was correct, Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying the measured acknowledgement of a commanding officer who recognized exceptional performance. "The pattern identification led us directly to an advance team preparing for a much larger security breach." Sofia accepted the acknowledgement with professional composure. "The linguistic markers were consistent from the beginning, sir. They maintained military speech patterns despite attempting to disguise them as regional variations." Her response was factual and precise, focused on the operational details rather than personal vindication. Harlow studied her for a moment, longer, then made a decision that would reshape her career trajectory. "I want a complete briefing on your methodology, how you identified what our automated systems missed, and why your analysis succeeded where standard protocols failed." The request wasn't just professional courtesy. It was the beginning of institutional change. As the operation transitioned from active interdiction to site security and intelligence gathering, Sofia compiled her complete analysis methodology. She documented each step of her identification process, from initial linguistic anomaly detection through pattern correlation and position tracking. The report was thorough and detailed, presenting her approach as a repeatable methodology rather than intuitive insight. 2 days after the operation concluded, Sofia stood in the main briefing room, facing the combined intelligence and security command staff. Her presentation materials were displayed on the large screen behind her, showing the evolution of the communication pattern from initial detection through final confirmation. Officers who had previously dismissed her concerns now sat attentively in the front rows, their expressions reflecting professional interest rather than skepticism. Colonel Harlow introduced her presentation with unusual emphasis on its operational significance. "Lieutenant Novak's pattern identification methodology detected what our standard security protocols missed," he began, addressing the assembled command staff. "Her analysis identified an advanced reconnaissance team operating along our northeastern perimeter, using sophisticated communication disguise techniques specifically designed to defeat our automated monitoring systems." Sofia proceeded through her presentation with the same methodical precision that characterized her analytical work. She explained the linguistic markers that had first caught her attention, the pattern correlation that confirmed her suspicions, and the positional analysis that ultimately led to the successful operation. The critical element was recognizing that the regional dialect variations weren't random, she explained, displaying her comparative analysis on the main screen. They contained structured elements that maintained military speech patterns despite the civilian linguistic overlay. Throughout her presentation, Sofia spoke with quiet authority that came from demonstrated expertise rather than assigned rank. She didn't emphasize how her concerns had been previously dismissed or highlight the institutional resistance she had encountered. She focused entirely on the methodology and its operational application. When she concluded her presentation, the questions from senior officers were substantive and practical, focused on how her techniques could be implemented across the intelligence division and incorporated into standard monitoring protocols. No one questioned the validity of her approach or suggested that her success had been coincidental. Colonel Harlow closed the briefing with an announcement that transformed Sofia's professional standing within the organization. "Lieutenant Novak will be establishing a specialized pattern recognition unit within the intelligence division. All communication monitoring teams will receive training in her methodology, and automated systems will be recalibrated to incorporate her identification parameters." The assignment represented more than professional advancement. It was institutional acknowledgement that her approach had identified a critical security gap that standard procedures had failed to address. As the briefing concluded and officers filed out of the room, several paused to speak with Sofia directly, asking specific questions about her methodology and expressing interest in having their teams trained in her techniques. These were professional exchanges between colleagues who now recognized her expertise, not the dismissive interactions that had previously defined her experience. Major Reynolds, who had repeatedly rejected her concerns about the communication. Anomalies approached her last. His expression carried a complexity that suggested internal recalibration. "Your pattern recognition was exceptional work, Lieutenant," he said, his voice lacking the dismissive tone that had characterized their previous interactions. "I should have given your analysis more consideration when you first presented it." Sofia acknowledged his statement with professional courtesy. "The methodology is what matters, sir. Now we can implement it across all monitoring stations to prevent similar oversights." Her response was neither accusatory nor self-congratulatory. It focused on the operational improvement rather than personal vindication. As she gathered her presentation materials and prepared to leave the briefing room, Sofia recognized that her professional environment had fundamentally changed. The accent that had once been mocked as a liability had become irrelevant in the face of her demonstrated expertise. The meticulous attention to detail that had been dismissed as excessive had proven to be exactly what the situation required. She had earned recognition not by changing her approach or compromising her standards, but by persistently applying her expertise until results made her value undeniable. In the days that followed, Sofia began organizing her specialized pattern recognition unit. She selected team members based on analytical aptitude rather than rank or experience, looking for the same attention to detail and methodical approach that had defined her own work. The training program she developed emphasized human analysis working in partnership with technological systems, each complementing the other's capabilities, rather than relying entirely on either. Her unit was assigned dedicated space in the Intelligence Center, equipped with specialized monitoring systems configured to her specifications. Officers who had once avoided working with her now requested assignment to her team, recognizing that association with her methodology represented career advancement rather than professional limitation. 3 weeks after the successful operation, Sofia received a message summoning her to Colonel Harlow's office. The colonel's administrative assistant showed her in immediately, without the waiting period that typically accompanied such meetings. Harlow sat behind his desk reviewing operational reports, but set them aside as she entered. "Lieutenant Novak," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, "your pattern recognition unit is producing exceptional results. 3 potential security concerns identified in the past 2 weeks, all confirmed through field verification." Sofia acknowledged the assessment with professional composure. "The team is adapting quickly to the methodology, sir. The combination of human analysis and recalibrated automated systems is proving effective at identifying anomalies that previous protocols missed." Harlow studied her for a moment, then reached into his desk drawer and removed an official folder bearing command insignia. "There's something you should see," he said, sliding the folder across the desk toward her. "Intelligence Command has been reviewing your service record." Sofia opened the folder to find performance evaluations from her previous assignments, reports she had never been permitted to see. The evaluations contained a repeated phrase that appeared in different forms throughout her career history: communication challenges due to non-standard accent patterns. The phrase had followed her through multiple assignments, a subtle but persistent professional limitation that had shaped how others perceived her capabilities. "Your accent was never the issue," Harlow said, his tone direct but not unkind. "It was an easy excuse for commanders who didn't recognize the value of your analytical approach. Your methodology didn't fit standard protocols, so they attributed the disconnect to communication difficulties rather than questioning their own systems." Sofia processed this information with the same careful consideration she brought to her analytical work. The realization that her accent had been used as justification for dismissing her insights was not entirely surprising, but seeing it documented throughout her service record brought clarity to experiences she had never fully understood. What matters now is results, Harlow continued. Your pattern recognition methodology has been formally adopted by intelligence command for implementation across all regional monitoring stations. They're sending a senior delegation next week to review your training protocols personally. The institutional validation represented complete professional transformation, from marginalized analyst to recognized subject matter expert whose methodology was being implemented at the highest levels. But Sofia's response remained measured and focused on operational concerns rather than personal recognition. The methodology requires proper implementation to be effective, she said. Analytical personnel need to understand the underlying principles, not just follow procedural steps. Harlow nodded in agreement, already anticipating her concerns. That's why you've been promoted to captain. Effective immediately, he said, removing a second folder from his desk drawer. You'll lead the implementation team personally, with authority to select your own training staff and establish certification standards. The promotion represented more than rank advancement. It placed Sofia in position to ensure that her methodology would be properly implemented throughout the intelligence division. Her expertise would shape how future analysts approached pattern recognition and communication analysis. As Sofia left the colonel's office with her promotion orders, she moved through the intelligence center with the same measured professionalism that had always characterized her presence. But the environment around her had transformed completely. Officers acknowledged her with respectful nods. Analysts sought her input on their work, and the specialized unit she had established operated with focused efficiency that produced consistently valuable intelligence. The accent that had once been mocked now barely registered in professional interactions, overshadowed by her demonstrated expertise and the operational results her methodology consistently delivered. She had earned recognition not by changing herself to fit institutional expectations, but by persistently demonstrating that her approach offered capabilities that standard procedures couldn't match. 6 months after the Northeastern Sector operation, Sofia stood in the Advanced Intelligence Training Center, watching a new class of analysts learn her pattern recognition methodology. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating workstations where future intelligence specialists practiced identifying the subtle patterns that automated systems often missed. Sofia's approach had been fully integrated into the standard intelligence curriculum, taught now as established methodology rather than alternative technique. The meticulous attention to detail that had once isolated her was being cultivated in the next generation of analysts, who would begin their careers understanding the value of human expertise working in partnership with technological systems. Lieutenant Chun, one of her most promising students, raised his hand with a question that captured the fundamental principle Sofia had been teaching. Captain, how do we maintain analytical independence when automated systems and established protocols tell us something different from what we're observing? The question reflected the same challenge Sofia had faced throughout her career, trusting her own analysis when institutional systems pointed in different directions. You document everything, she replied, her voice carrying the authority of proven experience. Record what you observe. Preserve the evidence that doesn't fit expected patterns, and present your analysis with methodical precision. She moved to the training display and activated a simulation based on the Northeastern Sector operation that had transformed her professional standing. Sometimes the most significant intelligence begins as a pattern that established systems classify as background noise. Your responsibility is to recognize what others miss and ensure it receives proper attention. The lesson continued with practical exercises in pattern recognition and analytical documentation. Sofia observed her students working through the same challenges she had faced alone, but they operated in an environment that valued their observations from the beginning, encouraged their questions, and provided institutional support for the kind of detailed analysis that had once been dismissed as unnecessary. During a break in the training session, Sofia received a notification on her secure tablet. The message was brief and direct. Request your presence at Command Headquarters at 0800 tomorrow. Intelligence Director Marshall. The highest ranking intelligence officer in the region rarely engaged directly with operational personnel, regardless of their recent accomplishments. Sofia secured the training materials, handed the session over to her assistant instructor, and returned to her office to prepare for the meeting. The space reflected her methodical approach, organized, efficient, with relevant information readily accessible. Her original notebooks were preserved in a secure cabinet, their detailed documentation now recognized as the foundation for a significant advancement in intelligence methodology. The next morning, Sofia arrived at Command Headquarters precisely 10 minutes before her scheduled meeting. The building housed the senior leadership for all regional operations, its architecture projecting authority and permanence. She was escorted directly to the conference room rather than waiting in the reception area, another subtle indication of her changed status within the organization. Intelligence Director Marshall stood near the window, reviewing information on a secure tablet. He was tall, deliberate in his movements, and known for making decisions based on comprehensive analysis rather than immediate impressions, he acknowledged. Sofia's arrival with professional courtesy that carried genuine respect. Captain Novak, he said, gesturing toward the conference table where several folders were arranged precisely. Your pattern recognition methodology has demonstrated exceptional results across multiple intelligence operations in the past 6 months. Sofia acknowledged the assessment with professional composure, waiting for the director to continue. Marshall activated the main display screen, showing operational statistics from various regional commands. Implementation of your methodology has increased accurate threat identification by 37%, while reducing false positives by over 40%. The statistics represented comprehensive validation of Sofia's approach, demonstrable improvement in operational effectiveness that extended far beyond her personal contributions. Marshall continued with characteristic directness. Intelligence. Command has authorized establishment of a dedicated pattern recognition division with specialized teams, operating across all regional commands. He turned from the display to face Sofia directly. They want you to establish and lead the division, with promotion to major and authority to implement your methodology throughout the intelligence structure. The assignment represented extraordinary recognition, the opportunity to shape how intelligence analysis would be conducted across the entire operational theater. The position requires someone who understands both the technical methodology and the institutional challenges of implementing new analytical approaches, Marshall explained. Someone who can train analysts to recognize what automated systems miss, and who has demonstrated the persistence to ensure valuable intelligence isn't dismissed because it doesn't fit established patterns. Sofia considered the opportunity with the same careful analysis she brought to all professional decisions. "Sir, I appreciate the confidence this position represents," she said, choosing her words with precision. "But effective implementation requires maintaining connection with operational reality. I would propose a structure that combines leadership responsibilities with continued involvement in selected field operations." Marshall studied her for a moment, then nodded in agreement. "That's precisely why you're the right person for this position. You understand that methodology without practical application becomes theoretical rather than operational." He activated his tablet and forwarded a document to the conference room display. "Draft your implementation plan with whatever structure you believe will be most effective. Intelligence Command has authorized priority resource allocation for this initiative." The meeting concluded with detailed discussion of implementation timelines and performance metrics, focusing entirely on operational effectiveness rather than personal recognition. As Sofia left Command Headquarters with her new assignment, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this position. The accent that had once been mocked had become irrelevant in professional evaluation. The attention to detail that had been dismissed as excessive had become the foundation for institutional methodology. The pattern recognition that others had failed to value had transformed into a critical intelligence capability. She had earned her position not through dramatic confrontation or institutional politics, but through persistent expertise and the eventual validation of her approach through demonstrable results. The pattern had always been there, waiting for someone with the right perspective to recognize its significance. Sofia had proven that professional excellence eventually speaks for itself, regardless of superficial characteristics that others might use as reasons for dismissal. The transformation was complete, but had changed nothing about her fundamental approach. She would continue applying the same methodical analysis, the same attention to detail, and the same persistence that had always defined her work. The difference was that now her methodology would shape how an entire generation of intelligence analysts approached their responsibilities. She had shown that true expertise didn't require conforming to institutional expectations or abandoning personal perspective. Sometimes the most valuable contributions came from those who saw patterns others missed, who persisted when others dismissed their concerns, and who maintained their professional standards even when faced with mockery or marginalization. The accent that had once defined her in others' perception had become merely one aspect of a professional whose expertise now shaped institutional practice. The pattern of transformation was complete, measured not in personal recognition but in operational capability that would protect countless lives through intelligence that might otherwise have remained undetected. The Pattern Recognition Division headquarters hummed with focused energy. Analysts moved between specialized workstations, their conversations technical and precise as they applied Sofia's methodology to intelligence streams from across the region. The space had been designed to her specifications, combining advanced technology with environments conducive to human analysis, recognizing that the most effective intelligence came from the partnership between the two. 18 months had passed since Sofia's promotion to major and appointment as division director. In that time, her pattern recognition approach had transformed from experimental methodology to essential intelligence capability. The walls displayed operational statistics that told the story of that transformation: successful threat identifications, prevented security breaches, and intelligence insights that automated systems alone would have missed. Sofia moved through the division with quiet authority, pausing occasionally to review analyses or answer questions from her team. Her uniform now carried the insignia of her rank, but her demeanor remained the same: focused, methodical, and utterly professional. What had changed was how others responded to her presence. Junior analysts straightened when she approached, not from military formality, but from genuine respect for her expertise. Senior officers sought her input on complex intelligence assessments, valuing her perspective even when it challenged established interpretations. The accent that had once been mocked had become simply another aspect of a leader whose judgment had been repeatedly validated through operational success. Captain Rivera, Sofia's deputy director, approached with a secure tablet displaying a new intelligence assessment. "We've identified an unusual pattern in the Western Territories," he reported, his tone reflecting the professional focus that characterized the entire division. Automated systems classified it as routine communication variants, but the linguistic analysis shows structured elements that don't match regional patterns. Sofia reviewed the assessment with careful attention, noting the methodical documentation and comparative analysis that followed her established protocols. "When did the pattern first appear?" she asked, focusing on the timeline that might reveal operational significance. "First detected 17 days ago, but our retrospective analysis found earlier instances that weren't flagged by standard monitoring," Rivera replied. "The pattern has increased in frequency and complexity over the Past week, suggesting operational escalation. Sofia nodded, recognizing the hallmarks of potentially significant intelligence that conventional systems had missed, exactly the type of pattern her division had been established to identify. Implement Level 2 verification protocols. She directed, I want comparative linguistic analysis across all regional dialects and correlation with any unusual movement patterns in the same sector. Rivera acknowledged the instruction and returned to the analysis section to implement the verification process. Sofia continued her walk through the division, observing her team applying the methodology she had developed through years of careful practice. Each analyst brought their own perspective and expertise, but all operated within the framework that emphasized human judgment, supported by technological capability. The division had grown beyond her initial vision, expanding to include specialized teams focused on different aspects of pattern recognition, linguistic analysis, behavioral indicators, communication anomalies, and movement patterns. What united them was the fundamental approach that valued human expertise and meticulous documentation, ensuring that significant intelligence wouldn't be dismissed because it didn't trigger automated alerts. In her office later that afternoon, Sofia reviewed the comprehensive assessment Rivera had prepared following the verification protocols. The analysis was thorough and detailed, presenting compelling evidence that the Western Territories pattern represented coordinated activity, disguised to avoid detection by standard monitoring systems. The linguistic markers showed sophisticated adaptation to regional dialects, but maintained underlying structures that indicated professional training. The transmission timing suggested operational coordination rather than civilian communication. The positional data correlated with terrain features that would facilitate, undetected, movement through areas with minimal security presence. Sofia approved the assessment for elevation to command, adding her own analysis of potential operational implications. The documented pattern suggested advanced preparation for significant activity, similar to what she had identified in the northeastern sector 18 months earlier, but with more sophisticated concealment techniques. As she prepared to forward the assessment, her secure communication system activated with an incoming priority message. The identification code indicated. It came directly from General Mitchell, the regional commander who oversaw all security and intelligence operations. The message was brief and direct. Require immediate consultation on emergent situation. My office, 1600 hours. Sofia acknowledged the summons and completed her review of Rivera's assessment, ensuring it was ready for presentation at the highest command level. The Pattern Recognition Division had earned its place in the intelligence structure through repeatedly proven results, but each new identification still required the same methodical documentation and analytical rigor that had established its credibility. General Mitchell's office occupied the top floor of command headquarters, its windows offering a panoramic view of the operational complex that coordinated all regional security activities. The space reflected its occupants' character, organized, functional, and focused on operational effectiveness rather than personal status. Maps and operational displays covered the walls, presenting current situations across the entire region. Sofia arrived precisely 10 minutes before the scheduled meeting, her assessment materials organized for efficient presentation. The general's aide showed her directly into the office rather than having her wait, another indicator of how her professional standing had evolved. General Mitchell stood reviewing a tactical display, his posture reflecting the disciplined focus that had defined his 30-year military career. Major Novak, he said, turning to acknowledge her arrival. Your Pattern Recognition Division has identified something that requires immediate attention. The statement wasn't a question, but a recognition of established credibility. Sofia noticed that her division's assessment was already displayed on one of the operational screens. The command structure had integrated her methodology so completely that significant findings were automatically elevated to the highest levels. "Yes, sir," she replied, moving to the display and activating her detailed analysis. "We've documented an emerging pattern in the Western Territories, showing sophisticated attempts to conceal coordinated activity. The linguistic markers and transmission characteristics suggest professional training disguised as civilian communication." She presented the evidence with methodical precision, highlighting the key indicators that distinguish this pattern from normal background communication. The general followed her analysis without interruption, his expression reflecting focused concentration rather than skepticism. When she concluded her presentation, Mitchell activated a separate display showing military intelligence from outside. "Their operational area. Your assessment aligns with information we've received from external sources," he said, bringing up classified reports that had been inaccessible to Sofia's division. "Border security forces in the adjacent region have reported unusual movement patterns and equipment transfers that correspond with your identified communication structure." The correlation validated Sofia's methodology at the highest operational level. Her team had identified significant activity purely through communication pattern analysis, reaching the same conclusion as field intelligence operating with direct observation capabilities. Mitchell studied the combined intelligence picture for several moments, then made a decision that demonstrated his confidence in Sofia's assessment. "I'm implementing regional security alert based on your pattern identification," he said, activating the command communication system. "All sectors will increase surveillance with particular focus on the Western Territories. Field teams will deploy to the primary locations identified in your assessment." The response represented extraordinary confidence and intelligence derived primarily from communication pattern analysis, committing significant resources based on methodological identification rather than conventional confirmation. Mitchell turned back to Sofia after issuing the initial orders. "I want your division to maintain direct communication with field teams during this operation. Your pattern recognition capabilities may identify developments that standard protocols would miss." The assignment placed Sofia's division at the center of a major regional security operation, with direct communication channels to field commanders and real-time integration of their analytical capabilities. It represented complete institutional validation of her approach to intelligence analysis. "We'll establish a dedicated monitoring team focused exclusively on this operation," Sofia replied, already mentally organizing the resources required. "Captain Rivera will coordinate pattern analysis with real-time field reports to identify any adaptive measures they implement as the operation progresses." Mitchell nodded in approval, then addressed a dimension of the situation that went beyond immediate operational concerns. "Your pattern recognition methodology has fundamentally changed our intelligence capabilities," he said, his tone reflecting professional assessment rather than casual praise. "What began as individual analytical technique has become essential operational doctrine. Intelligence Command has authorized implementation across all regional divisions, with your team providing the training and certification standards." The institutional adoption represented the complete transformation of Sofia's professional journey from marginalized analyst, whose accent had been mocked, to the architect of methodology that was reshaping intelligence operations throughout the command structure. Yet her response remained focused on operational effectiveness rather than personal recognition. "Proper implementation will require specialized training and ongoing calibration," she said, addressing the practical challenges of expanding her methodology. "The system works because human analysis and technological capability operate in partnership, each supporting the other's strengths. Maintaining that balance requires more than procedural instruction." Mitchell's expression showed understanding of her concern. "That's precisely why Intelligence Command wants you to oversee the implementation personally," he replied. "They recognize that methodology without proper training becomes procedure without understanding. You've been authorized to establish a dedicated training academy with whatever resources you require to ensure your approach is properly implemented. The assignment represented the ultimate professional validation, the opportunity to institutionalize her methodology in ways that would shape intelligence operations long after her personal involvement ended. Sofia would determine not just how current operations were conducted, but how future analysts would approach the fundamental challenge of identifying what automated systems missed. As the Western Territories operation unfolded over the following days, Sofia's pattern recognition division demonstrated the full capability of her methodology. Their real-time analysis identified adaptive measures almost as they were implemented, allowing field teams to adjust their approach before conventional intelligence could have detected the changes. The operation culminated in the identification and neutralization of an advanced infiltration team that had been establishing infrastructure for a major security breach, using sophisticated techniques specifically designed to defeat standard monitoring systems. The communication pattern Sofia's team had identified led directly to operational infrastructure that might have remained undetected until activated. 3 weeks after the successful operation, Sofia stood in the newly established Pattern Recognition Academy, addressing the first class of senior intelligence officers selected for advanced training in her methodology. The facility had been designed to her specifications, combining academic instruction with practical application in simulated operational environments. The officers seated before her represented every regional command and intelligence division, experienced professionals who would return to their units as certified instructors, creating a multiplier effect that would spread her methodology throughout the intelligence structure. Sofia had personally selected the training scenarios from actual operations, ensuring that the instruction remained grounded in operational reality rather than theoretical principles. Pattern recognition begins with understanding the limitations of automated systems, she explained, activating the main display to show comparison data from previous operations. Technology excels at processing information within established parameters, but struggles with anomalies that don't trigger predefined alerts. Human analysis provides the contextual understanding and intuitive recognition that technology lacks. Throughout her presentation, Sofia emphasized the partnership between human expertise and technological capability, neither superior to the other, but each essential for comprehensive intelligence development. The officers followed her instruction with focused attention, recognizing that they were learning methodology that had repeatedly proven its operational value. During a practical exercise that afternoon, Colonel Davis, a senior intelligence officer with 20 years of experience, asked a question that captured the fundamental shift Sofia's methodology represented. How do we balance analytical independence with institutional procedures when our observations don't align with established assessment frameworks? The question reflected the core challenge Sofia had faced throughout her career: maintaining professional judgment when institutional systems pointed in different directions. "You document everything," she replied, her voice carrying the authority of demonstrated expertise. "Record your observations with methodical precision. Preserve the evidence that doesn't fit expected patterns, and present your analysis through proper channels with thorough supporting documentation." She activated the training system to display case studies from previous operations, where critical intelligence had initially been dismissed because it didn't align with established assessment frameworks. Sometimes the most significant threats operate specifically to avoid triggering our established alert parameters. Your responsibility is to recognize what others miss and ensure it receives proper attention through professional presentation and persistent follow-up. The training continued with practical application of her methodology to increasingly complex scenarios, each drawn from actual operations where pattern recognition had identified threats that conventional systems had missed. Sofia observed that officers working through the same challenges she had faced alone, but they operated in an environment that validated their approach from the beginning and provided institutional support for the kind of detailed analysis that had once been dismissed. After the training session concluded, Sofia returned to her office to review the implementation progress across regional commands. The reports showed consistent adoption of her methodology with measurable improvements in intelligence, effectiveness at each location. What had begun as her personal analytical approach had become institutional doctrine, transforming how intelligence operations were conducted throughout the command structure. As she completed her review, Sofia received notification of an upcoming command ceremony. The message included an unusual personal note from General Mitchell. Your presence specifically requested by command staff. Details classified until ceremony. The cryptic message suggested something beyond routine military recognition, but provided no additional information. The ceremony was scheduled for the following week at Regional Command Headquarters, the highest level installation in the operational theater. Sofia prepared with her usual methodical attention to detail, ensuring that her uniform and presentation met the exacting standards she maintained for all professional activities. When she arrived at command headquarters, she was escorted directly to the main ceremonial hall rather than to a preparation area. The space was filled with senior officers from every regional command, their presence indicating an event of unusual significance. Sofia recognized faces from Intelligence Command, Field Operations, and Strategic Planning, the complete leadership structure assembled in one location. General Mitchell approached as she entered, his expression suggesting satisfaction with developments she didn't yet understand. Major Novak, he said by way of greeting. There's someone who specifically requested your presence today. He gestured toward a small group near the ceremonial platform, where a distinguished officer in formal dress uniform stood in conversation with several command staff members. Even from a distance, Sofia recognized the insignia of the intelligence. Director General, the highest-ranking intelligence officer in the entire military structure. The Director General's presence at a regional ceremony was unprecedented, suggesting significance far beyond routine recognition. As Sofia approached with General Mitchell, the conversations around the Director General paused, and he turned to face her directly. Major Novak, he said, his voice carrying the measured authority that came with commanding the entire intelligence apparatus. Your pattern recognition methodology has transformed our operational capabilities across multiple regions. Sofia acknowledged the assessment with professional composure, maintaining the same disciplined focus that had characterized her entire career. The Director General studied her for a moment, then continued with unexpected directness. What you may not know is that your methodology identified a security breach that extended into the highest levels of command structure, he said, activating a secure tablet to display classified information. The communication patterns your team documented in the Western Territories operation led us to uncover a sophisticated intelligence penetration that had evaded detection for years. The revelation explained the unprecedented assembly of command leadership and the classified nature of the ceremony. Sofia's pattern recognition methodology had identified not just a regional security threat, but evidence of a systemic vulnerability that reached into command operations. The full extent of the situation remains classified, the Director General continued. But I can tell you that your analytical approach revealed what multiple security reviews and technological systems had missed. The implications extend far beyond regional operations. The Director General turned to address the assembled command staff, his voice carrying throughout the ceremonial hall. Major Novak's journey from communication analyst to intelligence methodology pioneer represents the highest traditions of professional excellence. She developed her approach without institutional support, persisted despite professional skepticism, and ultimately transformed how we conduct intelligence operations throughout the command structure. Sofia remained composed as the Director General detailed the operational impact of her methodology, citing specific examples where pattern recognition had identified critical intelligence that conventional systems had missed. The public acknowledgement at this level represented complete institutional validation of an approach that had begun as one analyst's attention to details others dismissed. In recognition of her contributions to intelligence operations and national security, the Director General concluded, Major Novak is hereby promoted to Colonel, effective immediately, and appointed Director of Advanced Intelligence Methodologies, with authority to implement her pattern recognition approach throughout operational theaters. The promotion and appointment represented extraordinary recognition, placing Sofia in position to shape intelligence operations across the entire military structure, not just regional commands. As she accepted the formal promotion documents, Sofia maintained the same professional composure that had defined her career, even as she recognized the transformative nature of the moment. The ceremony concluded with the Director General's final observation that captured the essence of Sofia's professional journey. Colonel Novak has demonstrated that true intelligence excellence comes not from technological capability alone, but from the partnership between human expertise and automated systems. Her persistence in developing and documenting her methodology despite institutional resistance represents the innovative thinking our security challenges require. In the reception that followed, senior officers who had once dismissed Sofia's analytical approach now sought her input on intelligence challenges facing their commands. The accent that had once been mocked had become irrelevant in professional assessment, overshadowed by demonstrated expertise and validated methodology. As Sofia prepared to depart for her new assignment at Intelligence Command Headquarters, she met with the pattern recognition team she had built from the beginning. Captain Rivera and the division analysts had gathered to acknowledge her promotion and new responsibilities. The atmosphere combined professional pride with genuine appreciation for the leader, who had created opportunities for all of them. Your methodology changed how intelligence operates, Rivera said, expressing what everyone in the room understood. But more importantly, you showed that professional excellence eventually speaks for itself, regardless of how others initially respond to it. Sofia addressed her team with the same focused clarity that had characterized her leadership from the beginning. What we've built together goes beyond methodology, she said, looking at the analysts who had implemented her approach and expanded its capabilities. We've demonstrated that the most valuable intelligence comes from recognizing patterns others miss, from questioning what automated systems classify as background noise, and from persisting when institutional procedures would have us move on to other priorities. She gestured toward the operational statistics displayed on the division walls, the documented results that had validated their approach through repeated success. These numbers represent more than operational effectiveness. They show what becomes possible when we combine human expertise with technological capability, when we value analytical independence within institutional structures, and when we recognize that sometimes the most significant patterns appear first as anomalies that don't fit established expectations. As she concluded her remarks, Sofia acknowledged the journey that had brought them all to this point. The Pattern Recognition Division will continue expanding its capabilities under Captain Rivera's leadership. The methodology we've developed together will shape how intelligence operations are conducted throughout the command structure. But the most important lesson extends beyond specific techniques or procedures. She paused, looking at each team member individually before continuing. True professional excellence doesn't require conforming to expectations or changing who you are to fit institutional preferences. It comes from maintaining your standards, developing your expertise, and persisting until results make your value undeniable. The transformation was complete, but Sofia's fundamental approach remained unchanged. She would continue applying the same methodical analysis, the same attention to detail, and the same persistence that had always defined her work. The difference was that now her methodology would shape how an entire generation of intelligence professionals approached their responsibilities. She had demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable contributions come from those who see patterns others miss, who persist when others dismiss their concerns, and who maintain their professional standards even when faced with skepticism or marginalization. The accent that had once defined her in others' perception had become merely one aspect of a leader whose expertise now shaped institutional practice. As Colonel Novak departed for her new command, she carried with her the quiet certainty that had sustained her throughout her journey, the understanding that professional excellence eventually speaks for itself, that persistence in the face of dismissal often reveals what others miss, and that sometimes the most significant discoveries begin with patterns that others dismiss as background noise. The story of how Sofia Novak transformed from mocked analyst to intelligence methodology pioneer would become part of institutional history, taught to future intelligence officers as an example of how innovation often begins with individuals who recognize what established systems miss. But for Sofia, the most meaningful validation had always been operational effectiveness, the lives protected and threats neutralized because someone had noticed what others overlooked. In her new position directing advanced intelligence methodologies, she would ensure that the pattern recognition approach she had developed would become standard practice throughout the intelligence community. The methodology that began with one analyst's careful attention to details others dismissed would become the foundation for identifying threats that might otherwise remain undetected until too late. The accent that had once been mocked had become irrelevant, overshadowed by the undeniable value of the perspective it represented. Sofia had proven that true expertise doesn't require changing yourself to fit institutional expectations. Sometimes it requires changing institutional expectations to recognize the value of different perspectives, different approaches, and different voices that might otherwise be dismissed. As her transport departed for Intelligence Command Headquarters, Sofia reviewed her notes for implementing pattern recognition methodology across all operational theaters. The documentation was meticulous and comprehensive, reflecting the same attention to detail that had characterized her approach from the beginning. The journey continued, but the pattern of transformation was complete, measured not in personal recognition, but in institutional capability that would shape intelligence operations for generations to come. The commander had indeed frozen at her unit designation, not because of her accent, but because of the undeniable expertise it had come to represent. Sofia Novak had transformed how intelligence operations identified the patterns that matter most, not by changing who she was, but by persisting until others recognized the value of seeing what they had previously missed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.